At 22, I began seeing a guy I met through a dating app named Hunter. Over the span of a little more than a month, we went on 4 dates. Initially, things seemed fine. Our first date was just a quick coffee meetup, lasting less than an hour. It felt more like a screening than anything else, just a chance to see if he seemed normal. The second date was at a bar nearby, where we had a few drinks and enjoyed some light conversation. It was a fun time, and I felt like we were starting to hit it off. For our third date, we went out for dinner, and that's when I started to feel a bit uneasy. I began questioning whether I truly clicked with his personality or if there was something off about him that I just couldn't pinpoint. The night ended with a kiss, the first and only one we shared. At the time, I told myself it was a sign things were going well, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. A couple of weeks later, we went on our 4th and final date. We met up for drinks again, but this time, I wasn't as excited. I had already started to pay closer attention to his little quirks, and something about his behavior didn't sit right with me. It's hard to describe, but he came across as antisocial, and even a little creepy. He started drinking way too much, becoming overly touchy-feely and trying to kiss me multiple times. I'm not a fan of PDA, especially not in a public place like a bar, so I politely rejected his advances. A few minutes later, I mentioned I was tired, trying to signal that it was time to leave. He paid the bill, and we grabbed our coats to head out. As we walked to our cars, he stopped me and bluntly asked if I wanted to go home with him. I told him, "Not tonight. I'm tired and have work tomorrow," which wasn't entirely true. I just wasn't interested in going back to his place. He pushed, saying he could drive me to work, but I was already annoyed. The whole situation felt absurd. Whether he was drunk or not, the fact that he was pressuring me after I had already declined was enough for me to decide I wasn't seeing him again. I made my way to my car, being extra cautious since I'd had a couple of drinks. I wasn't drunk, but I was alert and paying attention to my surroundings, which is probably why I noticed that the same car was following me. I turned a few times, and every time, the car was still behind me. At a stoplight, I realized it was Hunter's car. I texted him, "Are you following me?" and got a reply almost immediately. "Yes, I just want to make sure you get home okay." His response felt strange, so I tried calling him, but he wouldn't pick up. This was beyond weird, and it was starting to get unsettling. I pulled over to text him again, telling him to stop following me because I was fine. For a brief moment, he stopped in the middle of the street, presumably reading my message, before driving off. He didn't respond after that, but later that night, after I was home and in bed, I received another message from him. He apologized for getting too drunk and suggested we do something more low-key next time, like dinner at his place. I didn't respond. The next morning, he followed up with another text, "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" Then, just a couple of hours later, he sent me a question mark. I decided to respond, so things wouldn't escalate further. I wrote, "Hey, I had a great time getting to know you, but I just don't think our personalities click. I really want to focus on myself right now. I hope you understand." That's when the angry texts started pouring in. The worst one was a demand for me to pay him back for everything he had bought during our dates. He followed up with a few more bitter messages that included personal insults. That was enough to make me block him, hoping this would be the end of it. But things didn't stop there. Soon after, I began receiving calls from a no-caller ID number, constantly. I ignored them for a while, hoping he'd get the hint, but he didn't. Then, one evening when my parents weren't home, I came back from work to find a bouquet of flowers and a card from Hunter on my doorstep. The card was an apology, asking for a second chance. It was clear that somehow he had found out where I lived, and that was deeply unsettling. In his mind, he probably thought this gesture would seem sweet or charming, but to me, it was terrifying. I immediately sent him a long, final message, telling him not to contact me again and not to come near my house, or I would be forced to file a restraining order. I kept his number blocked, not wanting to see any more messages from him. I thought that would be the end of it, but I couldn't have been more wrong. One night, after my parents had gone to bed, I woke up to what sounded like noises downstairs. At first, I wasn't sure what it was, but I distinctly heard a door opening from outside my bedroom. I quickly crawled out of bed and hid under it, grabbing my phone to call 911. My heart was pounding as I texted my family to ask who was home. I could hear distant sounds, footsteps, and then my bedroom door opened. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't notice me. I heard footsteps creeping up the stairs, but since the whole upstairs was carpeted, it was hard to hear anything clearly. Then, I heard drawers opening next to my bed. I held my mouth shut to keep my breathing quiet. My heart raced as I heard a man's voice, low and muttering, "God damn it." In that moment, I realized it sounded like Hunter's voice. I stayed still, praying my phone wouldn't make any noise. The rummaging continued, and then I felt the bed shift as someone sat down on it. I could see the outlines of 2 shoes through the bed skirt, visible even in the dark. I didn't know what he was doing, but he stayed there for several minutes before getting up. I heard him mutter another curse under his breath. Then, I heard all the drawers close, followed by footsteps retreating downstairs and the door shutting. I stayed hidden under the bed for 10 to 15 minutes until the police finally arrived. When I met one of the officers at the front door, I told him everything that had happened, and a female officer joined in to help search the house. We discovered that all the windows were unlocked, and one window in the dining room was large enough for someone to crawl through. I later found out that Hunter must have sneaked in through there. The police gave me a report number, and I filed everything, including text screenshots of him admitting he had been following me home. They said they would investigate, but without solid proof of him being in the house, it was a tricky case. Though they couldn't do much, I was able to secure a restraining order against him, and I was advised not to contact him again. Thankfully, he never reached out again. But for the rest of my time living there, I was constantly paranoid. Even now, I sometimes worry that he might have found out where I live and is still lurking out there. I was in 6th grade when everything started unfolding. It all began around Halloween, a time that was meant to be fun and filled with excitement. I had stayed after school to help with the decorations for the Halloween carnival at my school. It was always a blast, hanging out with friends, and the best part was getting rewarded with pizza for the work. While I was with my group of friends, there was also this one kid who stayed late every time. Let's call him Chris. Up until that point, we had always gotten along well. Chris was genuinely fun, easygoing, and someone I enjoyed spending time with during those after-school hours. I never once felt uncomfortable around him. He seemed like just another kid, nothing out of the ordinary. However, things started to take a strange turn. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and a group of girls from my grade came up to me, practically bursting with excitement. They were all grinning, and I couldn't help but feel curious about what was going on. When I asked what the deal was, they immediately told me that I had a secret admirer, and that he would be texting me that evening. To be honest, I felt a rush of both excitement and nervousness. Who was this mystery person? A part of me was flattered, but another part was also anxious to figure out who it was. Later that night, just as I was about to get ready for bed, I received a message notification on Messenger. This was the only app one used to talk to my parents when I was home alone, so I was used to getting messages from them. However, this one was different. It was from Chris. I had completely forgotten that I had added him on Facebook a few days earlier. I opened the message, and it read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." I immediately felt uneasy and quickly typed back, asking if everything was okay. The typing bubbles stayed on the screen for a while, almost as if he was hesitating to write something. When the message finally came through, I wasn't prepared for what I was about to read. In a long paragraph, Chris poured his heart out to me. He told me how he had been thinking about me non-stop since Halloween, confessing that he had tried to impress me with his soccer skills, but I never seemed to notice. He said that he had grown tired of being ignored and that he wanted me to notice him. Then, it hit me, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I stared at the message for a long time, a mixture of confusion and discomfort washing over me. I barely knew this kid, and we had drifted apart long before this. I didn't know how to respond without hurting his feelings. After some thought, I told him that I didn't feel the same way, and that I just wanted to stay friends. I could tell that my response wasn't what he wanted to hear. He kept asking me why, over and over, pressing me for answers that I honestly didn't have. Eventually, he stopped messaging, but the damage had been done. The next day at school was a nightmare. His friends kept coming up to me, telling me how Chris had shared with the whole grade that he wanted to kiss me, and that he would do it, no matter what. Some of them even said he would go as far as cornering me to make it happen. I took this as a serious threat and immediately told my teacher. She advised me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and to run back to the classroom if I saw him even remotely approach me. But that didn't feel like enough. I went to the principal's office to report the situation, and he assured me that something would be done immediately, which provided me with some brief relief. However, things took a darker turn. It wasn't long before I realized that Chris knew where I lived. My house was right across the street from the school, and he knew that. Later that week, as I walked home, I hadn't even gotten inside my house for more than a couple of minutes when I heard someone knocking at the door. I peeked out the window and saw someone hiding behind a parked car. It was him, Chris. He must have been following me. My mom opened the door, and on the floor was a note addressed to me. It was a strange note, saying that there was a surprise waiting for me under my brother's Cadillac in the driveway. My mom went to check, but there was nothing there. A few days later, my brother's Cadillac mysteriously stopped working, and it had to be sold. To this day, I have no idea what Chris did to that car. The harassment didn't end there. Chris's friends kept pressuring me to give him a chance, telling me that he would treat me right. I even caught Chris taking pictures of me one afternoon as I walked home, but I didn't notice until I heard the faint sound of an iPhone camera. Who knows how many pictures he had of me on his phone? Every morning, I woke up to a message from him, something along the lines of "I can't wait to see you today," or "I bet you'll look beautiful at school." The constant messages and his increasingly obsessive behavior made me feel unsafe, especially with the added knowledge that he knew where I lived. Things took another disturbing turn when I was called into the counselor's office. I felt hopeful that something would finally be done about Chris's behavior, maybe the police would get involved. But instead, the counselor shocked me with her words. She told me that boys will be boys, and that they sometimes do crazy things when they have a crush. She suggested I should feel flattered by his actions and that I should just accept it as part of growing up. At the time, I didn't fully understand the problem with what she was saying. I trusted her, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But looking back, it was one of the most upsetting things I could have heard. To hear a grown adult tell me that the harassment and fear I was experiencing was just a part of life was both disturbing and heartbreaking. I told my mom everything the counselor had said, and she was furious. She immediately called the school to demand that something be done about the situation. I was called into the principal's office again, this time with my mom present. I'll never forget what she said to them. "What are you waiting for? For something terrible to happen to her before you take action." Her words made them silent, and after some tense moments, my mom made it clear that the counselor was not to speak to me again unless my mom was there with me. Sadly, despite the threats and the constant harassment, Chris faced no real consequences, and I felt like he had gotten away with everything. But it didn't end there. One night, when my parents were out shopping, I was about to go to sleep when I heard a series of thuds against my window. Now, my room was on the second floor, so this was especially odd. The only thing that had ever hit the window were birds, but this was different. Repeated thuds, like someone was throwing something at the glass. My heart sank as I slowly crept out of bed and looked outside. There, standing below my window, was Chris. He was holding a handful of rocks, and he looked up at me, making eye contact just as he was about to throw another one. I don't even remember exactly what he was saying, but I was too scared to stop and listen. I immediately checked all the windows and doors in my room, locking everything tight, before I ran back to my bed, where I received several messages from him. "Why did you leave? I just wanted to talk. I'm sorry. All I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me." After that, I blocked him, hoping that it would be the end of it. Thankfully, that was the last time I heard from Chris. But I still had to see him around school for the next several years, all the way through to senior year. The last I heard of him was that he had been arrested, but the reasons were unclear. What haunts me the most, though, is how the counselor dismissed my fears and belittled the situation, telling me I should be flattered. I sincerely hope that woman no longer works with children, and I hope I never have to see Chris again. If you've ever been through something like this, or if you know someone who has, it's crucial to take it seriously. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're overreacting. Always speak up, seek help, and make sure you're safe. I want to remain as anonymous as possible, so for the sake of privacy, I'm changing all names, towns, and details in this story to ensure it can't be traced back to me. This experience left me with some deep scars, and to this day, I struggle with PTSD from what happened. It was a traumatic event, one that's been hard for me to process, so I've decided to share it anonymously in the hope that it helps someone or brings awareness to the darker sides of relationships. I've always been a bit of a recluse, even as a kid. My teachers often mentioned to my parents that I had social behavior issues. I was even put in some special classes in elementary school, like speech therapy and behavior sessions, though at the time, I didn't understand why I was the one singled out. I never had any learning disabilities, just struggled with socializing. As I moved into middle school, things got a lot worse. I found it hard to fit into any groups, and that continued into high school. Things didn't get better right away, but I slowly learned to navigate through life as an introvert. As time passed, I made a few close friends, and I'm thankful for those friendships. However, when it came to girls, things weren't much different. Being a socially withdrawn person naturally made dating a challenge. To be honest, it took me until I was 21 to lose my virginity. That felt late compared to my peers, but it was what it was. By the time I was 23, I had moved out of my parents' house, and I was doing well in my career, making a decent income. I bought a townhouse, not too fancy but a nice enough place, especially for someone my age. One evening, as I was swiping on Tinder, I matched with a girl I'll call Emily. She was attractive, and we hit it off quickly, so we decided to meet for dinner at a nearby restaurant. I was nervous, unsure if I was coming off as awkward, and by the end of the night, I figured she wouldn't want to see me again. But when I got home and checked my messages, I was thrilled to see her text saying she had a great time and really liked me. We went on a couple more dates, and I started to feel more at ease. Eventually, we became exclusive, and everything felt great. But, as with many relationships, the initial excitement faded. At first, it was exciting when she'd text or call, but soon I started feeling overwhelmed by how often she'd reach out. She would ask where I was, why I wasn't responding immediately, or if I was busy. It seemed like she was always following up with questions, and I started feeling a bit smothered. Then one day, she insisted that we share our locations on our phones. I didn't like it, but I agreed. The relationship was progressing, but I began noticing some things that unsettled me. After a couple of months, the situation started to get out of hand. One night, I was hanging out with my friends Phil and Mark, when she showed up unexpectedly at Phil's house. His mom even walked her down to the basement, where we were all chilling. She was furious, practically yelling at me for not answering her texts about a winery trip we were supposed to take the next day. I told her we could talk about it later, but she insisted on leaving with me. We had a heated argument outside, and I told her I needed space. I sent her a text saying I wanted a break, which, in retrospect, wasn't the best way to handle things, but I was scared of how she might react face to face. Things took a turn for the worse after that. She began bombarding me with calls and texts, and when I stopped answering, she showed up at my front door, pounding and ringing the doorbell relentlessly. My neighbor had to intervene and tell her to leave, but the whole situation disturbed me. At that point, I decided I'd had enough and blocked her. Despite that, she didn't stop, and I started feeling more and more suffocated by her obsessive behavior. A week later, I went to Phil's place again to hang out with the guys. When I came back home that night, I was exhausted but hungry. As I was getting ready to watch a movie, I heard a strange noise from the dining room. The layout of my townhouse was a bit odd. A circle from the kitchen to the dining room, living room, and den. I kept my doors shut, so it was unsettling to hear one of them open. I grabbed the largest knife I could find, called 911, and explained the situation. I told the dispatcher that I thought my ex had broken into my house, and they instructed me to wait outside. When the police arrived, we searched the entire house together. We checked every room, every closet, under the beds, and even the attic. The house was clear. The officer told me to call again if I heard anything, which made me feel like they believed me and weren't dismissing the situation as paranoia. Despite the reassurance, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I tried to relax, but I couldn't. I ended up falling asleep after taking some melatonin. That's when things took a darker turn. I woke up in the middle of the night to a bunch of texts from an unknown number. When I checked, it was Emily. She was apologizing and begging me to talk. The texts quickly escalated, with her demanding that I wake up. It was disturbing to see how persistent she was, especially at such an ungodly hour. I responded, telling her to stop, that I had no interest in reconciling, and that she needed to leave me alone. Seconds after sending the message, I heard a loud scream coming from the closet next to my bed. It was Emily's voice, and the closet door burst open. I didn't have time to process anything. I bolted out of bed, opened my bedroom door, and rushed to get out of the room. I slammed the door behind me and held it shut as she tried to force her way in. I could hear her on the other side, yelling, and then I saw her holding a knife. The situation escalated quickly, and I knew I had to do something to survive. In a panic, I blurted out that I loved her, hoping it would stop her. It worked. She hesitated, and I seized the moment to call 911 again. We spoke through the door, with me trying to buy time. I lied, telling her I wanted to get back together, hoping she would drop the knife. She finally agreed to throw it across the room, and once I heard the knife hit the floor, I made my move. I threw open the door, tackled her to the ground, and held her there until the police arrived. The officers kicked down the door, and it felt like the entire house shook with the noise. They arrested her right there, and she was in hysterics. The aftermath of that night was overwhelming. Emily was arrested and later convicted, but it wasn't something I felt good about. It was someone I had once loved, someone I spent a lot of time with, and yet she tried to kill me. The entire experience still haunts me, especially the realization that I missed many red flags because I was blinded by my own insecurities and desire to impress her. The pain from this experience has stayed with me, and I know it will for the rest of my life. Even though I'm telling this story anonymously, it feels good to finally get it off my chest.